It's time to talk about a very hands-on episode of Star Wars Resistance.
How you get so big getting food of this kind?
Hello and welcome in as we do a spoiler review of the First Order occupation, this week's episode of Star Wars Resistance. I'm going to talk very openly about the details going forward, so please wait to watch this if you haven't seen the episode yet. But with that, let's go ahead and get into the story. This week, we are once again keeping up with Synara as she tries to get off of the Colossus. She knows the First Order is here. She knows they are out to get the pirates after they betrayed them last week. And she wants to try to get away, but she can't because the First Order has greatly locked down all transportation. Meanwhile, the First Order is doing First Ordery things, causing all sorts of problems on the platform of the Colossus, harassing different citizens and the like. Kaz kind of gets caught up in the middle of it because he can't stand to see people pushed around. Unfortunately, the First Order also has an interest in him. See, they know that the pirates have a spy on the base, and they think it's likely to be Synara, and they know that Kaz is a friend of Synara, so they come knocking on Kaz's door to ask him some questions. While they are temporarily distracted, Yeager warns Kaz not to get involved, and then of course Kaz runs right off and gets involved, and ultimately tries to help Synara escape the Colossus, and as a result, he and Synara open up to each other about their involvement with food. The first thing I have to say about this episode is that I thought it did a fantastic job of juggling seriousness with funniness. There were several points in the episode where I laughed out loud at some of the great stuff that's going on. One of my favorite recurring characters in the show has always been the big puffy janitor guy. He had a really funny through line where unfortunately he lost his weird hallway broom, and he seemed to be very upset about this throughout the whole episode, including having a very awkward elevator encounter later in the episode. Niku was back and at his best with his confusion over the phrase knowing the station like the back of his hand. There was all sorts of things in this episode where I really liked the humor of the show and I really thought it worked. If you are the type of person that can't stand so much as a single joke during an action sequence, then this episode might have felt like regression to you. The biggest thing that might seem like regression is Kaz's character, and please note that I said the word seem. See, Kaz is back to his bumbling self. There's a lot of slapstick humor, he's clonking his head on things, he's knocking things over, he's trying to be big and heroic and ultimately having to get saved by everybody else because he's seemingly kind of bumbling. The last couple episodes I've been reviewing, I've said how great it is to see Kaz kind of on his own, doing his own thing, not being bumbling, really growing as a character. I don't actually see this episode as a regression, though. It's my own personal feeling, and also something that I've kind of seen from other regular reviewers of the series that I've been following, that Kaz kind of got better because when he started out at the beginning of the episode, it wasn't so much that he was dumb, it's that he wasn't taking things seriously, right? He thought this was fun, he was hanging out with Poe Dameron, and now he understands how serious things are, and he's taking them serious. To me, what's going on in this episode is he's still taking things very seriously, but he's back to being awkward because he's back to being in a situation where he's going to feel awkward. Namely, he's around Synara. So it's pretty obvious in the show that Kaz has a crush on Synara, so that element is involved anyway. He's going to be a little bit doofy because he feels doofy around her. But it's also because he now knows that she's a spy, and he knows he's a spy, and that's just going to make things weird too. So it's kind of putting him back to the element that he's actually the weakest in, which is being a spy interacting with people, right? He's gotten better at the actual spying, the actual observing and finding things out, but he's not gotten any smoother talking to people. So you have him not being smooth talking to people in general, and then make people his crush, and he's gonna be kind of a goofball. Maybe this is annoying to you if you watched the episode, and if that's the case, then that's fine. I don't personally see it as a character regression. I think it fits very strongly in what we know about Kaz and where his strengths and weaknesses lie, and I actually thought it was kind of cute and fun in the context of this specific episode. Obviously, there was a lot of seriousness involved. The First Order is coming around, making no bones about the fact that they're just going to throw their weight around. We see Doza talking to Pyre, being upset about this type of thing going on, and then there's also the understanding that if Kaz gets outed as a Resistance spy, he's gonna take everybody at Yeager's garage down with him. I mean, it's going to put Yeager in trouble, Tam in trouble, Niku in trouble, and there's a lot of stakes riding on it for him. So this episode was really an episode where I thought we found the gravity of what the First Order coming to the Colossus is going to mean, and we finally get to see that. But again, I thought it juggled that very well with a lot of levity. Again, by bringing back Niku, who, other than having a very Niku-centric episode when the show came back, hasn't really been in the show as much. It was really funny seeing Synara get to know him, and she kind of saw it right to his heart right away as well by calling him brave. I thought it juggled a lot of tones effectively in one episode. I've always been the type of person where I enjoy things that have many different tones in them. I prefer something that is funny and sad and serious and intense and as opposed to watching a funny thing or a serious thing or an intense thing or what have you. Something I find really strong in Resistance. So take that with a grain of salt as to whether or not you would agree with me with the humor in this episode. I was really happy to see the character growth with Kaz and Synara in this episode in terms of how they relate to each other. Kaz puts everything on the line to save her, and she recognizes that, and when she's home free, she actually leaves safety to come back and save Kaz at the expense of it being harder for her to escape. I liked that confirmation. I mean, we already knew it, but I like seeing more that Synara is actually a good person that's kind of caught up with the wrong people. I think it's going to be less of a redemption arc for Synara, but it's more of a realization arc for Synara. She kind of strikes me as the type of character that's probably been raised in this pirate life and didn't actually know any better, and now that she's interacting with people outside of her band of pirates, she's kind of starting to see how things could actually be. So I think it's less that she's becoming a good person and more that she's always been a good person, but has been put in a position where she's been doing bad things, and she sees an opportunity to stop that. One thing I kind of want to talk about here briefly, which is something I haven't really talked about in a lot of my reviews, is the notion of shipping. Not shipping in terms of cargo, but shipping in terms of relationships. The fellow fans that I've interacted with are all over the place. I know people who ship Kaz and Synara, Kaz and Tam, Tam and Synara, Kaz and Tora. Those work or don't work for any number of reasons for me. But I think one thing that's interesting about this show is it is a show where they've put so many different characters, such a good blend of male and female characters, that this is a show where I feel like you can kind of have that speculation on who's going to end up with who, in a way that Clone Wars couldn't do, and the way that Rebels didn't really do. But I think it's also important to note that we've never really had that kind of come to pass in any Lucasfilm animation, and before the Chineras out there get on my case, bear with me as I explain what I mean. But in Clone Wars, there was really no romances that were set up that weren't established before the Clone Wars. Obviously, there was Obi-Wan and Satine, but most of that started before the Clone Wars even started, and we were seeing something that was already established play out. Similarly, Anakin and Padme, yeah, there seemed to be a thing with Lux and Ahsoka, but it never really came to anything during the series. You get to Star Wars Rebels, yes, Kanan and Hera were a thing, and they're one of my favorite couples in all of Star Wars, but they were kind of a thing before Rebels, right? Rebels was never a do they like each other or don't they like each other. It's a they do like each other, and are they ever going to do anything about it because they're too busy fighting a war. It always seemed obvious in Rebels that those two had feelings for each other, whereas if you look at something like Ezra and Sabine, there are people who really like Ezra and Sabine together, there are people who really don't like Ezra and Sabine together, but you kind of can see it either way by watching the show. That's a lot of what I'm seeing in Resistance right now. It's fun to kind of say, like, oh, I'd like to see these two characters together, I'd like to see those two characters together, which I don't say to dissuade anybody from having fun with that if that's the type of thing you enjoy. Just a fair warning that don't make that the thing you need from the show, the reason why you watch the show, because it might not play out. That said, as far as I can tell, the only well-established couple within the show is Flix and Orca, because obviously Flix and Orca are a couple if you watch them interact with each other at all. Leaving relationship talk and going into friendship talk, I found it really interesting how involved Niku was in this kind of deception. So Niku is the very honest, very blunt, everything goes over his head kind of character, and now he seems to have some idea that at least Synara is on the run from the First Order, and that Kaz is kind of up to more than Niku might really realize. And while he was kind of going along with it well within the show, I think it's going to be interesting what happens if Niku actually learns Kaz's secret. Is he going to be upset? Is it something where he's going to kind of understand? Either way, once he has the secret, is he going to be able to keep it? With Tam, I found it really interesting that she was kind of a First Order sympathizer, but thinking about it, she doesn't really have a strong reason to be against the First Order. Most of the bad, injustice, and pain in the galaxy she would have seen would have been at the hands of pirates. So anybody who's actually going to show up and do something about the pirates is going to be good in her book. I don't think that's a loyalty that's going to last very long. I think once Tam would learn the First Order was behind Tora's abduction and behind the pirates being terrible at all, I think she will very quickly turn against them. I don't think this is like an ideological alignment with the First Order, but rather just a desire to see the pirates bested. And then to backtrack again, like I said, I find the relationship, whatever it may be, between Kaz and Synara to be very interesting. They both know that each other has a strong interest in food now, or spying, if you will, and they've kind of both opened up to each other where they know who the other person is, and they know that the other person knows who that person is, and I think that it could be really interesting to see where they go. I don't think there's a whole lot left in the mid-season trailer that involves Synara that we haven't already seen, so I'm kind of wondering if that means she's not going to be involved with the series much in the remainder of the season, or if how she is involved with the remainder of the season would be such a spoiler that it didn't make it in the trailer in the first place. But those are my thoughts on this week. Please let me know what you thought as well by leaving a comment. You can also find us on various social media platforms at Port Haven Forums on Twitter. You can search the Star Wars Refuge on Instagram. We have a link to our Discord in the description. And of course, we have our blog site, port-haven.com. And with that, I'm going to leave you guys here. Until next time, keep it real and fly casual.
Cooking can be fun.